Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Cardinal Dash. I am King Jimison alongside Daniel Martinez Crams. And oh boy, Daniel, for the first time since we began this show, we can definitively say that there will be Pac-12 football this fall. And it is good to get into that. There's so much that's happened in the sports world, but we got a lot to talk about in the Cardinal sports world alone. So let's get right into it, Daniel. First, with the announcement that we're going to have a Pac-12 football season this fall, can Stanford reach the Pac-12 title game in this strange, shortened season?
Not only can they should. That should be the expectation at the outset of the year. All we know about the schedule is that 5 of the 6 games will come against North opponents. That's all we know right now. There's going to be a non-divisional game. We don't know who it's going to be against. But of those 5 games against North opponents, Stanford can win all 5. The toughest game is going to be Oregon, no doubt. But again, they're replacing a quarterback in Justin Herbert went in the top 10 of the NFL draft. 3 DBs have opted out already, and they've lost a left tackle. Stanford's also lost a left tackle, but that's a lot to lose for one team. Similar situation in Washington. A new coach, a new quarterback. Cal, definitely a beatable team. Chase Garbers, really like what I've seen there, but he's the only other returning quarterback in the North besides Davis Mills. And then we look at Washington State, also has a new head coach in Nick Rolovich coming over from Hawaii, and also has to replace Anthony Gordon. A lot of new there. And then Oregon State, that has to be a must-win game. They're replacing a quarterback as well. You look at that, you look at all those 5 games, Stanford should be able to win all 5. And then we don't know what's going to happen in that 6th game, but Stanford can win all 5 there. They should be in the title game.
Boy, you are an optimist. And I thought you were a scientist. I thought, Daniel, that you objectively looked at facts and that's how you made your entire living. You know, that's where you live. But I got to say, you're living in a different world if you think that Stanford should reach the Pac-12 title game. Can they? Definitely. They definitely can. I think it's there, and I'll talk about those reasons why in just a second. But first, I think we need to address the fact that those little words below the question here, Stanford hasn't reached the conference championship or hasn't won the conference championship since 2015. What's changed in that period? The program has only regressed further. So all you can hope for is that the rest of the Pac-12 has come down to your level, because Stanford has not risen to the occasion to meet the place where Oregon and Washington are at this point. Stanford is playing in the kiddie pool with Oregon State and Washington State, while Oregon and Washington are competing for Pac-12 championships. Stanford snuck into the Pac-12 title game in 2017, behind a fantastic season from Bryce Love. They haven't really been close to sniffing that stage in the past couple seasons since, and of course last year went 4-8. So they got a lot to prove on that front. But I got to agree with you on this. The North is completely up for grabs. And thanks to the question in the chat, you think Cal can't beat Stanford? Daniel, I'll let you address that. I think Cal might honestly be the favorite to win the Pac-12 North when this is all said and done. When you look at the roster that they're bringing back everybody. Whereas Oregon has got some major issues with the opt-outs they're facing. Washington's got a lot of change. I think Jimmy Lake's going to continue what Chris Peterson started, but it's not a certainty whenever you have a coaching change. And I really think Oregon is starting to look to me like LSU, and we're going to get to LSU later, as a team that had a great season last year, but is losing so much of what made last season great. And that's really just come in the past few weeks with these guys that Mario Cristobal thought was going to be on his roster. They're not there anymore. But still, I just don't see Stanford at that level yet until we see Davis Mills play at a championship level as a quarterback, because I think that's Stanford's only hope.
Davis Mills can play at a championship level. We'll talk about it later, but last year against Washington State, the guy threw for 504 yards, the only time they really let him air out. Okay? Stanford has the potential. Am I saying that they're actually going to win all 5 of those games? No. But should they? Should they? Yes. Because they're all, at least Stanford has 40, 45% in each of those games. So why not? Why not trust yourself and say, you know what, we should win all these games. That should be the expectation from the outset. Just like last year, KJ Costello, when he was a Stanford quarterback, talking about the goal for last year was winning a Rose Bowl. And that was the expectation. And you ask what's changed since 2017. Have they really regressed that much since 2017? Maybe in a lot of ways in recruiting and things like that. But then we also see that Stanford has a a year this year with a lot of returning talent and a lot of expectation. A lot of returners, a lot of starters on both sides of the ball will definitely be able to put in work. And honestly, yes, I think Cal can beat Stanford, but do I think they will again? No. They barely won last year. Chase Garbers had a miracle run at the end of the game. Stanford looked like the better team in that game, and I will stick by that. So this year, we're looking to the future. I still think Pac-12 North up for grabs. Stanford's going to take it.
North is definitely up for grabs. We are there on that point. But Stanford finished dead last in the Pac-12 North last season. Technically, they finished tied with Washington State, but Washington State had a better overall record and beat Stanford last season. Stanford was last. And you think they're going to go from last to first when there's been some roster turnover, when you're not looking at a team that's bringing in a top 5 recruiting class. I think they're going to get better. I think you and I both agreed last season was a fluke. But I don't think the Cal loss was a fluke. I think last year's big game was an indication of one program that's headed this way and another program that's headed that way. And those supply and demand curves are not meeting in a good place for the Stanford Cardinal football program, because I worry that Justin Wilcox is building something at Cal, and this year in a COVID-shortened season where Oregon's opened the door, maybe Cal's the school to walk right through it, whereas I think Stanford has that chance, but like I said, it's going to be on Davis Mills. And we're going to talk a lot about quarterback here in a few minutes, but I think Davis Mills is really going to be the difference maker. Because last season, Stanford was really good at no position. I mean, as a position unit, they struggled almost everywhere. But they were really young, and they were hurt by injuries. And this year, I think we believe the offensive line is going to be better. I think we believe there's talent on defense, there's depth on defense that could make a difference and make Stanford at least an above-average Pac-12 defense. But I think the big hole is going to be, how is that offense going to turn into a complete train wreck, into something that could potentially win a conference championship? I think there's a lot of legwork to be done. And with this COVID-shortened offseason, we talked about the impact specifically on Stanford with so many players, not on campus, having to come back at the last minute. I just don't know if they're going to be able to get ready in that amount of time. But I really hope you're right, because if one thing can make 2020 better, it's a Stanford football Pac-12 championship and potentially a New Year's Six Bowl appearance. I think there's a long way to go till we get there. And we want to make sure we are encouraging the chat and go ahead and drop your questions in there. And we'll talk more about Stanford's season as we move into getting a schedule out for the Pac-12. But I think it's safe to say that nobody really knows what to expect from this season. And we're going to get 5 Pac-12 North games. We're going to get 1 Pac-12 South game. We don't know who that Pac-12 South game is. Personally, I'm hoping that it's USC, because you might as well play the big boys. You might as well play that rivalry, but we'll talk about that more later too. But that part of the schedule is going to affect Stanford as well. If they do draw USC and, say, Oregon draws Arizona, that's a significant advantage for the Ducks to get that easy game in and really pave their path to the Pac-12 championship. But we've said it all along. Davis Mills has got a lot to prove this season. He was the number 1 ranked quarterback, one of the top players in the entire 2017 recruiting class. Because of injuries and many other things, he hasn't quite been able to get to that same level. But he showed signs. As Daniel brought up, that Washington State game last season was a real eye-opener for everybody, including me. I've always been a big KJ Costello guy. We're going to talk about KJ Costello later on this show while we're waiting for Daniel to get back here. But Davis Mills really made me feel better about that transition when he set that Stanford passing record with over 500 yards up at Wazoo. But we also saw a lot of inconsistency. He didn't play great in some of those later games. He played great in the first half against Notre Dame, struggled in the second half. Great in the first half against Cal, struggled in the second half. Struggled a little bit against Colorado. Just couldn't quite put it together in those games where Stanford was fighting for bowl eligibility at the end of the season. The biggest difference in Stanford's season this year will be whether or not he can get back to that type of level. And Daniel, are you back with us? We waiting for you? All right, so I think Daniel's still down for the count. So we're going to transition to the next part of our show today. Folks, the biggest elephant in the room in Stanford sports this weekend is not what happened in the Pac-12. It's what happened across the country in the SEC, where we saw one of the most dynamic quarterback performances I could ever remember from a former Stanford quarterback wearing a shade of red, just the wrong shade of red, and playing for the wrong iconic Pac-12 coach. KJ Costello, in his first game in a Mississippi State uniform with Mike Leach leading the charge there in Starkville, Costello goes out and throws for 623 yards and 5 touchdowns. And by the way, that 623 yards was an SEC record, the first time a quarterback has ever thrown for over 600 yards in an SEC game. And folks, we all knew KJ Costello was good. His 2018 season was one of the best statistical quarterback seasons for a Stanford quarterback in history. Over 3,500 yards, an all Pac-12 level season. But I don't think anybody thought he was capable of this. And there was a reason that the Stanford coaching staff ultimately went with Davis Mills at the end of last season. Yes, it was injuries, but they also believed in Davis Mills' upside. The fact that this guy was a 5-star recruit, that he had shown so much promise in high school, and that when given game opportunity, he was starting to show some of that promise in college as well. But you know what? It's hard to argue with what KJ was able to do on the field on Saturday. And when Daniel gets back, I'm going to ask him this exact question. Did KJ Costello's performance against LSU make Stanford look bad? Did it make David Shaw look bad for going with Mills over Costello at the end of last season? Because that was a decision. If you put your full confidence into KJ Costello and say you are our starter next season, he probably sticks around. He clearly loves Stanford. He's comfortable with that Nerd Nation personality. I think a guy who was willing not to be in the spotlight. He's very candid, a great guy to interview, but didn't need to be in the SEC. But he wasn't going to get that same attention at Stanford because he was going to be at best competing for a job and possibly cemented as the backup coming into this season. So I think it's safe to say that KJ Costello opened a lot of eyes on the farm, not just around the nation, but particularly on the farm with what he was able to do on Saturday. And I think it also hinted at the fact that in today's world of college football, a team that throws the ball 60 times in a game is really attractive to recruits and really attractive to fans across the country. Because, if you're a wide receiver, why don't you want to play that had the same number of passing attempts in the first half? I mean, KJ Costello had over 30 passing attempts in the first half on Saturday, as he averaged at Stanford for the entire season. He averaged about 32 attempts per game, and that was in perhaps the most pass-happy year of the David Shaw era in 2018. Well, in the first half against LSU, KJ Costello in a Mississippi State uniform had already eclipsed his average from Stanford. And when you see a guy like that, who we always called a gunslinger, that's his mentality, that's the way he plays. He's not afraid to throw it into any window. He has complete confidence in himself and his arm and his wide receivers. That kind of mentality in a Mike Leach offense, I always knew it would be good. I didn't know how good it was going to be. And I tell you what, it was an unbelievable performance. I'm really happy for KJ. I think that, right now, if there's a Heisman race, it would be Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and KJ Costello. And that's crazy to say because he never would have gotten that kind of attention on the farm. But, we said it in the description for this show. You saw a good KJ Costello. You also saw a bad KJ Costello. He also forced a couple throws. He had a pick six. He threw one down the sideline that was an ill-advised throw where he was trusting his wide receiver, and the defensive back went up and made a play. And that's what we saw from him a lot at Stanford. With the good, you were going to get a little bit of the bad, but ultimately it was still so worth it. I think he was really the only saving grace of that 2018 season for Stanford, where Bryce Love struggled, where the defense struggled. The KJ to JJ connection is what got limped Stanford to a 9-4 finish. And, we saw that same type of talent in a Mike Leach offense, and was it a beauty to behold. And I got to say, last season waffled. I was like, I believe in KJ Costello. He was what held this 2018 season together. But then when he struggled due to those injuries, I mean, he said it on Saturday, he could barely hold a football. He could barely throw a football. He was nowhere close to the peak of his abilities. And so, sure enough, it was the right decision to originally go with Davis Mills. And I pushed for that decision. But when you look at it now, when you look at KJ Costello at his best, what he's capable of, it's not such a clear-cut decision. I mean, KJ Costello has done infinitely more at the college level than Davis Mills has. And yes, ultimately it was going to be KJ's decision. Maybe he transfers anyway. But I think if he got in the vote of confidence from David Shaw, he probably sticks around. And that's not what he was getting. And I don't blame David Shaw because, I mean, Davis Mills was one of the most high-profile recruits of his entire tenure. But it's still going to be pretty disappointing if you see KJ Costello go on to, say, lead Mississippi State to an SEC championship or be a Heisman finalist or be an All-American. And I think he has that potential. He's more talented than any quarterback that Mike Leach has ever coached. And that's saying something because Gardner Minshew is now an NFL starter. And, oh, my goodness, welcome back, Daniel. God, the people are so tired of hearing me talk. But I'm just saying, KJ Costello is the most talented quarterback Mike Leach has ever had. I'm really excited to see what he does with him. But I think if Stanford struggles this season, and specifically if Davis Mills struggles, it's going to be really hard to watch KJ on the other side of the country dealing against much better defenses and putting up the numbers he's going to put up when that could have been Stanford, presumably. But Daniel, what do you think before we transition to our next question?
Look, I hear that it's hard. No one likes to see their ex go off and find someone better. You don't, right? But you also have to be really happy for him. He was never going to work out with us. He was never going to work out. What was going to be at Stanford is going to be a lot more seasons of him maxing out at 300, maybe 250 yards. And that's exactly what Davis Mills will do. He'll fit into the system and it'll work out. As you were saying earlier, KJ's a gunslinger. Dude's going to chuck it. He's perfect for a Mike Leach offense. That's exactly what they need. That's exactly who he came in to be. He was the number 3 recruit. That's exactly what he could be, and this is the best chance for him to get to the NFL. He shouldn't have stayed at Stanford. He probably wanted to because he loves it so much, but that's probably not what was best for him. And it's probably best for Stanford to go with Davis Mills because I think he's still the pro-style quarterback that they want. Are they going to transition to air raid? No, not while David Shaw is there. So why even joke about it? They're never going to throw for 600 yards. That's not their goal. They don't want that. If David Shaw threw for 600 yards, he'd be upset. One time they did come close to it last year with Davis Mills throwing 504 against Wazoo and that Mike Leach team. They were upset, and they lost. It was a losing effort. They broke the Stanford records, but in a losing effort. So KJ had a great Stanford career, 2-time captain. Everyone can be so happy that he was here, but it's a mutually beneficial breakup, and I think it's going to work out for both sides.
You know what? That's a great point. I just wanted to say that was my favorite thing to watch in sports this weekend. There was a lot of great things that happened in sports, but watching KJ deal was just amazing because I loved covering him. I think he's a fantastic player and a great person as well. And I think that you're exactly right. It's probably the best of both worlds, and it's certainly the best for KJ Costello. But from the perspective of a Stanford fan, and obviously this is a Stanford football podcast, a Stanford sports podcast, it is going to be kind of a referendum on David Shaw's roster decisions. And maybe that's not fair for it to be so, but, obviously at the local level, if Davis Mills struggles, if Stanford struggles, I think that it's really going to put some pressure on David Shaw, particularly when we already talked about the Ari Patu Miller-Moss decision. He's made these kind of decisions with quarterback rooms before. He trusts his gut. And I think, those questions, once they're out there, they deserve to be scrutinized either way. But my inclination is KJ is going to be fantastic, and Davis Mills is going to be really good too. And by the end of the season, it is going to be that mutually beneficial breakup that you're talking about, and at least I certainly hope so. So, Daniel, glad to have you back. My voice is just going to be gone today. But let's move on to something a little more in the abstract. We like to be an artsy show. We like to go beyond just what's happening in the now, even with you being doc and the biology major and all that. But, we've got a 6-game Pac-12 slate. We're not going to see the same number of games as we usually do. We're going to lose some of those Pac-12 South rivalries that we usually get. And we know we're going to get big game this season. It's just a matter of when and where. But I think it's worth discussing. Outside of Cal, who is Stanford's biggest rival? Obviously, big game's the biggest, but who else up there really gets that Cardinal blood boiling on that schedule? And who do you want to see on that 2020 slate out of the South?
If we're going who's the second best, I'm honestly going to go to USC. I'm going to honestly call them a 1B. And I don't even think there's that much between them and Cal right now. Because for so many years, Stanford's biggest rival was USC. The big game was important because that's the only game that students showed up for. But the game that actually mattered on the schedule was the game against USC. A lot of times it was before even school started. But that was the game that determined how Stanford seasons was going to shake out because that game was so important. This is a game that has been going on since the 1800s. It is a game that is incredibly important both historically and in the recent. Since 1999, Stanford has gone 12-11, despite absolutely sucking for the entire history. And honestly, if you talk to people at Stanford, they'll say that Cal is rival number 1, Stanford 1A, maybe 1B.
I wish we could disagree here because, that's just nothing I enjoy more than disagreeing with you on a Monday night. But you're so right. It is USC. And I got to say, from a personal standpoint, I hate USC at least as much as Cal, if not more. And I was thinking about it today. If you have a bougie spectrum, it's like USC and Cal are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and Stanford's right down the middle. You got USC, which is the ultimate Hollywood bougie. You got Cal, which is grungy Berkeley. And I know you're a Berkeley lover. I'm a Berkeley hater. But it's got its charm. And then right in the middle is Stanford. Got a little bit of both. Obviously, some people would say it's all bougie. But if you just look at the politics of the place, if you know what I'm saying, it's somewhere in the middle of those two. And both of those extremes are terrible. I can't take it. And USC, they always just roll up. They park their RVs. They bring in their swarms of Trojan fans. And they take over Stanford Stadium in a way that even Cal can't do from across the bay. And it's humiliating and it's frustrating because they show up at our tailgates and drink all our beer. And you have to put up with USC personalities. No offense, Sam. I know you're listening in the background. You have to put up with USC personalities for an entire day. And that's just a really hard way to spend a Saturday. And I think, that's probably still going to happen this year. I think if there's one Pac-12 South, Pac-12 North game that you maintain across the entire Pac-12 slate, it has to be USC-Stanford. And it would be a shame if that game's not played. But the only pro would be not having to put up with USC people for a day.
And then if we look about probably the most meaningful game in Stanford's 21st century, it was probably that game against USC in 2007, where they came in as 41-point underdogs and with Tavita Pritchard at the helm, somehow pulled it out. So on top of all those other things, which I don't know how you're going to tell me RVs and bougie in the same little sentence there, but I get your point broadly. It's a frustrating rivalry, I think, for sure. And a really good one, and one I really hope they're going to keep, because wrote about it this week for Sports Pac-12. But Stanford has played both USC and UCLA every year, both of them, since 1945. And honestly, going to be a true shame if that doesn't occur this year.
There's still a chance. If you think about it, that last game of the season is going to be a seeded game. I think it's fairly likely that Stanford is closer to UCLA's level than USC's level this season. But if UCLA is, say, a mid-tier Pac-12 North team, then UCLA and Stanford can play as those mid-tier Pac-12 North, mid-tier Pac-12 South teams in that seeded game, which by the way, I think is a fantastic idea. Clearly, once again, the Pac-12 as the biggest follower in the history of followers was just copying the Big Ten. But it's a good idea and one worth taking over because, even moving forward, it's great to see more than just conference championship games in conference championship weekend. And I think that may be something we're headed for. But by the way, the RV point, I just got to defend myself. I was moving in early sophomore year and trying to use the parking lot outside Castano, great dorm. And there were like multiple USC RVs that just rolled up and parked in that parking lot for the entire weekend. And, made it very difficult for me to move in my stuff. And they were annoying. They were, making lots of racket at all hours of the night. I mean, how am I supposed to put up with that? I'm just a very, very, no. Okay, we're not going to get into it anymore. But I think that it's very safe to say that USC is the second biggest rival to Stanford behind Cal. But I will say, I think it's always been Oregon, Washington that Stanford's really most directly competing with in the Pac-12 North. And yet right now, I think, as I said earlier, it's Oregon State, Washington State that Stanford's really playing in the same pool with right now. That's their sandbox. They got to get out of that sandbox and get back into the big boy sandbox. But first, they got to prove that they can do it by manhandling that Wazoo OSU combo and going on to maybe beat some of the big boys too.
Well, I really do feel like you already read my column because I had Oregon and Washington right up next after USC. But they're not in that sandbox. They're not in that kitty box. People have read way too much into that 4-8 season, and you're doing it too right now. And it's honestly a little bit frustrating, King, because you're better than this. You're better than this. They were not a 4-8 team last year. You can't tell me that. They had so many injuries. They did not play like a 4-8 team when they were at their healthiest. Their healthiest was that game against Arizona, and they looked like they could compete with anyone in the Pac-12. That was the one game that KJ was healthy, and he was a beast. He was nothing short of a beast. He won that game. That was on homecoming. It was like, wow, this is what Stanford football could be. And that's what they are, because they're not going to have those injuries again, because no one can have those injuries again. That was an insane coupling of injuries that had to go wrong for them to be that bad last year. It's not going to happen again. So in the future, we're going to see them as a decent team to a great team. And that's what I expect this year. But I want to go talk about that Oregon rivalry a little bit because it is next, and it's pretty interesting. Last 10 meetings, 5-5, not in a kitty box there. And they had that great win in 2018 with College Game Day. Also had a College Game Day loss in 2011. This is a game that's nationally important. In 7 of the 9 years, one of the two teams has represented the Pac-12 in the championship game. An important game for sure.
Great point on the 2018 season and specifically that win over Oregon with College Game Day. But the pendulum between 8-4 and 4-8 is not that big. I think in 2018, Stanford very well could have been a 6-6 team, and last year they probably should have been a 6-6 team. I actually think that 2018 and 2019 season were much closer than people give it credit for. 2018, Stanford was lucky to get some of those wins. Oregon is the biggest case in point of all time. That was one of the luckiest victories that Stanford has ever had as a program. Of course, they had to go out and make the plays, but Oregon also handed it to them with mistakes down the stretch. KJ Costello played fantastic, but the defense was getting absolutely torched until really Justin Herbert was both his own greatest advocate and greatest enemy. And we'll see if that plays out in the NFL. But Stanford was not that close. Was not that far from losing multiple other games that season, and they really were just a quintessential 8-4 team. Good, able to beat the teams that they're better than, but not good enough to beat national contenders. And I think last season, Stanford just got unlucky in those same games in which they got lucky a season before. And that kind of dynamic is really all the difference between 4-8 and 8-4 in a power conference. So I agree with you. Stanford is not a 4-8 type program, but they're going to have to do something for me to prove that they're more than, say, a 6-6, 8-4 type program. And in a Pac-12 only schedule, 6-game Pac-12 only schedule, getting to 4-2, I think, would be a big, big accomplishment for this Stanford roster.
It's got to be higher than that. Absolutely. We're going to go 5-1 right now.
I hope you're right. I always love your optimism. Sometimes it bothers me, so I just argue against it for that reason alone. But, folks, thanks so much for joining us this week. We're sorry for the technical difficulties. Sorry that you had to hear my voice a lot more as a result. But that's it for us this week at Cardinal Dash. Go out and follow us at dashsports.tv on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and find our website, of course, at dashsports.tv to see all of our videos. And plus, check out our columns, including columns from your boy Daniel Martinez-Crams. He's an even better writer than he is a speaker. My very handsome co-host has now got content in audio and written form, so go out and find that on sportspac12.com and follow at sportspac12 on Twitter as well. And folks, thanks so much for listening, everybody. And for Daniel Martinez-Crams, I'm King Jimison. Nerd on.